Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Dire, mic check. Dire. Dire. Alright, well. I heard Dire's dogs do a mic check. I don't know where he's at.
I'll never surrender. I'll never surrender. I'll never surrender. Not going down. I'm gonna stand my ground till the final hour, till the fight is over. Gonna soldier on, 'cause I'm an army of one. Gonna feel my power, till the fight is over, till the fight is over, till the fight is over. I'll never surrender. 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 There's a strength in me, got no defeat. I'm a survivor, this fight ain't over. 'Cause I'm rising up, never giving up. Never say never, this fight ain't over. This fight ain't over. This fight ain't over. I'll never surrender. 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 I'm not going down without a fight. I'll never surrender. I was born to stay alive. I'll get through the struggle, get myself on the rubble. It's never over until it's over. I'm not going under. I'll never surrender. I'll never surrender. I'll never surrender. Never surrender.
Welcome to the Dire Wolf Show, where we believe that America is exceptional and that our constitutional rights should never be infringed. I am Dire Wolf. On our show, we bring you the truth and debunk fake news. If you love laughing at the insanity of the regressive left, sit back and relax. Boy, do I have a show for you. So, Fox, when you were talking about last week that there was going to be like a special show this week, what were you talking about?
Yeah. Well, what's special, Dyer, is that I'm here. And I think it's pretty special when I'm here. What's also special is that I used recycled slides, and they say November 27th, 2000.
God, what a loser, man. Don't worry, we can fix it before we go live, right?
Yeah. Oh, what did I just click on? this is not a joke. I don't know what I just clicked on. How do I go back? Oh, okay. I clicked on a
Nazi
not.
fags.
How dare you?
Juicy nigga.
Why would you do that?
Oh, sorry. It sounds like the let's see. Okay, Alder Lupus for $5 says, "Good afternoon, guys. Hope you're having a good weekend. I'm preparing for a road trip to visit my sister as she graduates into the Marines. Wow, congratulations!
Awesome. Congratulations.
That'd be awesome. Glad to catch you before you left for that. Actually, that video that we just played was a tragic accident on my part. I believe that it had the Royal Marines and the Canadian military in there, and this is not a filthy redcoat channel, so my apologies to everybody.
I'm deeply offended.
Yeah, Dyer will be waterboarding me for the rest of the week until the next show after this one's over.
And Fox is promising to not enjoy most of it.
Yes, correct. But back to why today's show is special. Mostly because I have the wrong date on the slides. Also, I'm here. I'm very special. And you're here.
Show also last week, and so was I. So how is this week more special than last week?
Every week is a gift, Dyer.
I guess we're not at war with Ukraine, so that's a gift.
Not yet.
Yet.
But that's skipping ahead a bit. So
sorry. Welcome back, Wolfpack. Dyer Wolf here for our weekly news recap from Behind Enemy Lines on YouTube, where speech is not free and the truth is demonetized. Alongside me is my co-host, Fuck Treves. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. I still have not recovered from my Windows 11 update, and my Stream Deck still does not work. And it was great when it was just me because I didn't have to change the slides the scenes very often. But now that there's two of us and I have to change the scenes, which one of us is being shown on screen, it's really hard to do that with just a mouse.
I'm sorry, I'm a burden to you, Fox.
You are the biggest burden, Dyer.
Oh.
So some people call you Mr. Birded. You're birded so big, but you wouldn't call yourself that.
I wouldn't call myself that.
Yeah, but people call you that.
Other people call me a burden, not me.
Yeah, you don't. You're not entitled to your own pronouns, Dyer. You're a burden. Did you? Man, I wish we'd pulled up a clip of it. Did you happen to catch the takedown of the entire idea of like the trans narrative from Matt Walsh on Dr. Phil the other day?
Yes, I did watch that. That was very funny. She simply they said that he couldn't define he couldn't say that women were one thing or another. He couldn't say that they're genetically women that makes them women. He says, okay, then you tell me what women are. And this is, well, whatever they want to be. So you're saying the idea of womanhood is whatever any person says it is.
Well, yeah, and Matt Walsh was asking, okay, so you just said that trans women are women. What are women? And this trans person said, well, they're women. And he goes, yes, but what are women? Yes. It's very, very circular.
Very funny.
But if you haven't caught that, just Google. YouTube has very much loved showing it because it blew up this week. Just type into YouTube Matt Walsh Dr. Phil, and you will be blessed with a really great takedown.
When did Dr. Phil start doing political discourse stuff?
Dr. Phil's weird. I don't know.
That's the first thought when I saw that clip. By the way.
My favorite Dr. Phil moment is totally off tracks already. Great show so far. But there was, I don't know what it was specifically, but there was just like this kid who was doing he was like a TikTok star, and it was like breaking apart his family or something. And Dr. Phil is asking him about like, don't you think it's wrong that like you just like exploit people for entertainment value? And the kid turned around and goes, that's literally what your show is. You're exploiting people for entertainment value. and
Turned that on him real quick, didn't it?
Yeah, I was like, oops, don't glass houses and stuff.
Exactly.
So before we continue off the rails here, Dyer, do we have anybody that we want to thank tonight?
Absolutely. Everyone who makes this show possible. This show is your fault. Thank you for donating to us financially and doing the likes and the subscribes, the bits and all those bits and pieces. We appreciate it, including, but not limited to, Kaylet, Ori Main, Nathan, Cameron, Tetris Freak, Slowpoke, Thunder Erican, the White Lion, Timberwolf, and the White Wolf. Thank you very much for all you do to make this show possible. Also, please make sure you share us because we don't have an algorithm helping us out. In fact, it's trying to strangle us to death.
Yes, just like Dyer. Adder Lupus has a slight correction on his donation, which we appreciate. Apparently, it was supposed to be Atter Lupus, not Alter Lupus. Now, I don't know if I pronounced it wrong or if you typed it wrong, but it's Adder Lupus. We appreciate the $5.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
This first story is a doozy.
Yeah, it's almost as much of a disaster as our show is. So,
maybe it's slightly more.
Also, CT117 also has been a longtime fan and asked for a shout out, and so you definitely get one. And we appreciate your support and everything that you guys do. All right, so like this show, Biden had a train wreck this week, and it wasn't a train wreck in that somebody came by and stole all of his packages. It was just him talking for 2 hours uninterrupted, except for by himself. So on Wednesday, just 1 day shy of his 1 year as president, Biden graced the country with his second ever solo news conference as president of these United States.
It's funny, he did interrupt himself quite often to say he's taking too long answering the question. He apologized, which he's using as a verbal pause to say, "Oh, I'm taking this too long," when he's actually stammering, and he stops himself and he says that to explain, as if he I'm going too fast and going too long.
The problem with someone like Biden and those word whiskers, where you're using a filler word so you have time to think, is that Biden doesn't have enough bandwidth in his processor to simultaneously use a filler word and then also be thinking about what he's going to say after that filler word's done. A normal person would use a filler word, and then after the filler word's done, they would have thought of a sentence to say, and they'll say it. Biden gets to the end of the filler word, and then nothing. That's why you will often see him stop mid-sentence and just say, well, never mind. Which he does say. He's said never mind many times, dozens of times through his presidency, and that's why. Is because
what are we doing here? Or how long am I going to do this? He said those things.
Or just shouting Nazi fags. I don't know if that's a word whisker. That might be Tourette's.
Yeah. So his second ever solo news conference was often interrupted by him. So Biden was praised, though, by most of the left-wing media sources by saying that he had the longest solo news conference in recorded U.S. history, at just shy of 2 bumbling long hours. It was even longer than Trump's longest ever solo news conference, or as some people might call him, long dawn speeches. He'd never call himself that, but people call him that. They do, I promise.
Yes. The establishment media specified, quote, solo news conference, leaving out that even if you include joint news conferences where Biden appeared alongside other people in his administration or with Kamala Harris, Biden has still done far fewer news conferences than most presidents have done by this point in their presidency.
By a large amount, by a large margin.
Now, I will say it was impressive that he actually appeared in what appeared to be the real White House. We're pretty sure this wasn't a stage of the White House that was set up across the street from the White House, as he often appears at a fake White House that they built across the street. This did appear to be in the real White House, which was also a rarity.
Yeah, he spends so little time in the White House. Even when he is in D.C., he's in a fake White House, and then he's had more vacation days than most presidents as well.
Why is he looking at look at this picture we got on the screen here? Why is he looking at the podium like that? I mean, it looks like how you'd look at your dog after he like ate your wife's shoes or something. Just like, ugh, what am I doing here? I don't like this. I'm terrified.
He probably was terrified. Probably not looking forward to this. I think that he only actually did this conference because the left-wing news media had been making comments about how they weren't getting access to the president, and he wasn't doing news conferences or press conferences. So he did this to try to make a point to the media that support him usually that he is going to give them access, and also to counter those the narrative that he is not mentally there by saying, oh, look, he has the longest ever press conference. He's not losing it. But by putting him up there for 2 hours and subjecting him to this many questions and this much speaking, it just highlighted the fact that he can't do it.
As an example of how bad it was, we almost went to war with Russia, which is something that we'll talk about later.
Yeah. They also failed to mention that even though this conference was longer than any of Trump's solo news conferences, Trump regularly spoke far longer than 2 hours at a time, sometimes hitting 4 straight hours in events and rallies. And then he would go on and do other rallies in the same day. There was one time where Trump gave speeches at 3 different rallies, and one of the rallies was 4 hours long. He was doing a full day of giving speeches. In contrast to these high-energy Trump rallies, Biden's 2-hour time span was padded with long, rambling, and incoherent responses to questions.
Just like this show. However, he does deserve some credit. In an historic victory for the Biden White House, Joe Biden managed to avoid dropping the N-bomb, the F-bomb, and he also avoided shouting the word Jew, all of which he's done at previous speeches.
He didn't even call black kids sewer predators.
Yeah, so
it's impressive. I mean,
it was.
He's improving.
Instead of shouting out these word whiskers, which, man, if just shouting the word Jews is your word whisker, if you want to hear that, donate to us. You can hear it again. Instead, he fell back on the tried and true tactic of being a lying, dog-faced pony soldier. Biden's first lie is where he says that he has outperformed all expectations. I suspect not, but let's hear it from him. Oh boy.
Some of my colleagues will get into some. Thank you, Mr. President. I know some of my colleagues will get into some specific issues, but I wanted to zoom out on your first year in office. Inflation is up. Your signature domestic legislation is stalled in Congress. In a few hours from now, the Senate, an effort in the Senate to deal with voting rights and voting reform legislation is going to fail. COVID-19 is still taking the lives of 1,500 Americans every day, and the nation's divisions are just as raw as they were a year ago. Did you overpromise to the American public what you could achieve in your first year in office, and how do you plan to course correct going forward?
Why are you such an optimist? Look, I didn't overpromise, but I have probably outperform what anybody thought would happen. The fact of the matter is that we're in a situation where we have made enormous progress. You mentioned the number of deaths from COVID. Well, it was 3 times that not long ago. It's coming down. Everything's changing.
Wait, are we to believe that Joe Biden has figured out a way of reversing death? That the death numbers have come down under the Biden administration? Now, I believe he might be talking about the rate of death,
Yes, he means the rate.
But that is not true.
Yeah, it's not true. And also, there's been more deaths under his first year than Trump's first year with COVID. I mean, by all expectations means everyone else's expectations. And you can tell just from the news coverage that the people on the moderate left, moderate right, further right,
and the extreme left, all of them say he hasn't done what they want. And the list of accomplishments, I mean, he realized he made many, many more promises that didn't happen, right? It's like his own expectations he didn't meet. What's he talking about? It is delusional to think that you overperformed.
Well, and I'd be curious too. Does he know about some of these failures? Because did he forget about them? Did somebody just tell him that they worked and they moved on to the next thing? Did they just grab his signature and move on? Is he really? Does he really know what the state of the country is? And this actually goes into kind of a deeper topic with the economy, where I think now it's starting to change, but as recently as November, there was polls where if you ask Democrat voters, how's the economy doing, they would say great. You ask Republicans, how's the economy doing, they would say, well, the reality of it is awful. There's nothing at the stores, and what there is super expensive. The economy is doing terribly. And so you just have this kind of competing reality where one of them's real and the other one's completely made up. And the Democrats appear to live in the made up reality. And so it's no surprise that from Joe's perspective, everything's going just peachy, because everything always is going just peachy if you're a Democrat.
So we have a list of things that he has failed to do from his perspective, from the Democrats' perspective, that he has failed to do. And we'll go into that later on. But I mean, he has to realize the fact that polls are showing that the majority now of both Democrats and Republicans say that he is not doing a good job as president, that there's no way that can mesh up with the idea that he is beating everyone's expectations. If he was surpassing everyone's expectations, then we wouldn't be underwater in approval rating.
I believe he is hitting Obama's expectations, though. Obama's expectations were, don't underestimate Joe Biden's ability to fuck things up. And I would say the only person whose expectations are being met would be Obama's. I think a lot of us on the right as well, to the extent that he is able to accomplish things, with the Democrats are able to accomplish things, it's been a disaster. And it's mostly been accomplishments through the executive branch, through the regulatory bureaucracies, which are controlled by the executive. As this reporter just listed out, numerous legislative agenda items that are just failed. His first year legislation agenda just completely did not work at all, thank God. But to the extent that they have been able to do stuff using the bureaucracies for lockdowns, or suggesting lockdowns, or canceling pipelines, changing regulations on emissions, et cetera, they have done a hell of a job at destroying the economy and keeping it destroyed for the last year.
Yeah, the things he's accomplished were passing his infrastructure bill, the COVID response money, and the pipeline approval for Russia and disapproval for the U.S. All these things just made our inflation and our supply chain issues the way they are. All those things he thinks are positives are direct negatives.
Well, unless your goal is to destroy the economy, in some kind of reset, in a grand old reset sort of a thing, perhaps that's his goal, and that's what he's excited about. All right, let's see if we can finish off this clip. I don't know how much more is in there other than just him rambling.
It's getting better. Look, I didn't overpromise, but I think if you take a look at what we've been able to do, you'd have to acknowledge we made enormous progress. But one of the things that I think is something that, one thing I haven't been able to do so far, is get my Republican friends to get in the game of making things better in this country.
Yes, we would like the Republicans to join us in making the American people miserable. Now, normally the Republicans are willing to answer that call. However, they've also been ineffective at doing what they see as their duty the last few months as well. Thank God.
Yeah.
All right. The next one is maybe not a lie, but we'll just kind of let you guys watch it and see for yourself. I don't know that this one's a lie, but it was interesting.
49% of registered voters disagreeing with the statement, Joe Biden is mentally fit. Not even a majority of Democrats who responded strongly affirmed that statement.
Well, I'll let you all make the judgment whether they're correct.
Well,
Thank
so
you.
the question I have for you, sir,
What's that?
We already have made that judgment.
Yes.
if you'd let me finish, is why do you suppose such large segments of the American electorate have come to harbor such profound concerns about your cognitive fitness? Thank you.
I have no idea.
I believe him.
I also believe Joe Biden.
I think that's the truest statement he made that day.
Yes, Joe Biden. You heard it here. He has no idea why people think he has cognitive decline. I believe it.
If you didn't have cognitive decline, you'd be able to retrospectively look at yourself and what people have been saying about you and say, at least I understand why people might say that. I might think they're wrong, but if you are cognitively there, you could at least reason that, right? You could respond to the question.
Yeah, it's called self-reflection, a thing that Democrats do not have.
Right. But him not knowing why someone would think that seems to kind of feed into the whole idea that he's not mentally there.
It would certainly appear that way.
I mean,
All right.
I wouldn't say that, but other people say that.
Other people would definitely say that. All right, the next lie here was possibly the most egregious lie, but it's also the most classic lie. Biden claims that slight penetration doesn't count.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia.
You said that Russia would be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. Are you saying that a minor incursion by Russia into Ukrainian territory would not lead to the sanctions that you have threatened, or are you effectively giving Putin permission to make a small incursion into the country?
Good question. So it did sound like.
Why is she laughing?
The most important thing to do, big nations can't bluff, number one. Number two, the idea that we would do anything to split NATO, which would be have a profound impact on one of Putin's objectives is to weaken NATO, would be a big mistake.
Ukraine is not part of NATO.
So just the tip, and it it's not like you got to marry the girl. It's just a tip.
Yeah,
It's
but that was
never-
also a lie.
It's
He's saying
never just the tip. Everyone knows that.
allowing Russia to invade Ukraine would be impacting NATO, where they're not a member of NATO, right?
Correct.
So that's a lie.
Now, I wonder too. Maybe he was referring to the defense of Ukraine splitting NATO as well, because the NATO alliance is split on whether or not to even accept Ukraine or have a desire for Ukraine to join NATO. And by split, I mean almost every single member of NATO doesn't want Ukraine, and U.S. kind of does, because the people who are in control of the U.S. right now have a bunch of strategic business interests in the Ukraine. That's basically the split.
Is this our Ukraine segment?
It can be.
Okay, so
First off, Dyer, where is the Ukraine? Everybody.
definitely it has an arrow pointing at it.
Yes, it has an arrow pointing at it. It has a question mark over it. It is a country which everyone can identify on a map, because America, for some reason, has an obsession with the Ukraine. And we wouldn't just go to war at a place where most people don't know where it's at or what it produces or what its strategic value is, right? Right.
So
you thought you were excited to go die in the sandbox. Wait till you go die in the cold northern Ukraine.
it's the one next to Poland.
Where's Poland?
In the middle. It's the one in the middle of the screen.
I don't know, Dyer. I feel like you're trying to
They're
hoodwink
not
me.
numbered, all right?
Are you trying to steal my? Are you trying to steal my tax dollars?
It looks if you'd been a lot easier if you had numbered them. I just realized that.
I think it's the one that's in Australia.
It's definitely not the one that's Australia.
Well, that's what you say. You don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anywhere.
Yeah.
Most people don't know. Ukraine
Let's
is.
let's start the not the myth, the factual idea that the Ukraine is in Australia.
I mean, Australia's pretty terrible. So, I mean,
To be fair, most people don't know what's in the interior of Australia because there's too many kangaroos and spiders
not a whole
blocking
lot of
your
people
way.
live there.
There could be Ukraine could be in there. No one knows.
I mean, it's kind of like the flat Earth theory, right? Like, you
I
can't.
I am
can't observe
partial. I am partial to the Ukraine that's next to Montana.
I mean, if that was the case, then them being invaded by Russia would actually be a problem.
It would be.
So, are you going to show the next slide where it shows where it actually is?
There is no next slide, Dyer. That's just
Oh,
that's just
shit.
the slide.
I guess it's never going to be known then.
Yes.
It's the one I pointed out, by the way. Anyway,
yes.
so as far as Ukraine, my opinions on this are not in any way going to be based on or referencing what the military is planning to do, is capable of doing. So just keep that in mind. It's just simply my opinion on what I think the motivations of the military leaders involved and what the interest of the nations involved are. I think that we are far past the point of deterring Russia from invading Ukraine. That battle was fought and lost in a long time ago. Biden and America are not speaking from a position of strength in any way to motivate Russia to not invade. Now, with that known, Russia is going to take over Ukraine, or at least attempt to invade, right? So the question is, then should America spend their blood and treasure on defending a nation that we have no defense treaty with, that is, we have no claim to, and is not actually our ally?
Yeah. And to what end? The Ukrainian people right now live under one of the most corrupt regimes in what would be considered the West that exists right now. And so I don't know. I'm unconvinced that the iron fist of Putin taking over their country and kicking out their corrupt politicians to install his own. I'm not seeing a convincing argument why that is a net benefit or a net detriment to the Ukrainian people, and why, even if it is one of those, why Americans should care about it. Oh, that's so callous, Fox. Well, there's literally every country in Africa having the same issue right now, and nobody gives a fuck about it.
The reason why some members of the political elite in America and other countries want Ukraine to be part of NATO and want NATO forces, aka American forces, to be in Ukraine and for them to be friendly is simply because they want to deny Russia having that country be in their influence. They want to put NATO military equipment in Ukraine on the border of Russia so they have a deterrence against Russia taking any other military action, and also ability to surveil Russia from Ukraine. They want to control Ukraine. They have been politically trying to woo the country by subverting the nation for a long time and trying to make business deals with them. And at the same time, Russia is trying to get influence in the country just like we are. And the reason why they want Ukraine is because, one part, they want to rebuild the old Soviet bloc, and second, they also want a barrier between NATO and them. They see NATO trying to take land on their border as a threat, so they want to take that land as a buffer.
Yeah,
so it's kind of like cause
and some of the history on this is that several, and it's not just this amorphous group of unknown politicians. No, it's specific nameable people. The Biden family in particular, the Kerry family as well, along with several others, but they would be kind of the primary components of it in the modern day. There's a lot of families in Washington that have their family members entering into these corrupt deals in the Ukraine, because the Ukraine, for some reason, gets a ton of U.S. foreign aid, and then that foreign aid is divvied up amongst the corporations. Well, who's working at these corporations? Well, it would appear that, Biden's kids are, John Kerry's kids are. I'm sure other politicians' kids are as well, in different areas of the Ukraine. We know that they had some weird dealings with the Clintons at one point. And it's essentially, the Ukraine has become a laundering operation to transform your tax dollars into foreign aid dollars into Hunter Biden's crack binge. That's what the Ukraine represents to our elites. So they have a vested interest in maintaining its territorial integrity, because you can be goddamn sure that Putin is not going to allow that to continue. Yeah. But you've got that mixed with, right now, unfortunately, we have, the media has created this false reality. And it's one thing when, your crazy aunt from Chicago believes what the media says about Putin being the next Hitler, right? Am I saying Putin's a great guy? Probably not. Is he Hitler? No.
He's definitely not a great guy.
He's definitely not Hitler. So, but you also have the supposed powerful elites in Washington, people running various bureaucracies, people in the Pentagon, people in the White House, people in Congress, who are also watching the same media narrative about, oh my God, Putin is the next Hitler. We have to stop him. Otherwise, he'll elect Trump again. And they actually believe that shit. And so you have this combination of this moral panic over something that doesn't exist to the degree that they're pretending that it exists. Again, there's this moral panic that Putin's the next Hitler that the leftist elites have. It's just not true to the level that they believe it to be so. And then you mix that with a gigantic financial interest in the Ukraine. Now you've also got, with the military-industrial complex, you've got Mark Milley and Lloyd Austin again, who just had a hell of a parade in the Middle East 6 months ago. They're still recovering from that, I'm sure. But they both have had positions in the military-industrial complex, and then they get to graduate into running the military again, and using those assets and things that we purchased from the military-industrial complex. And then I'm sure when they retire, they'll go back into Raytheon and Lockheed, etc., and they'll get their nice fat checks for being on the executive board. Because if anyone is making the numbers for Raytheon, it's certainly Lloyd Austin. And so they have this idea that they want to have some kind of adventurous military policy. That's been kind of U.S. policy for at least the last 30 years. It would appear to be perhaps even the last 60 years, where we're always engaged in some kind of conflict where it doesn't appear that the goal is to win. The goal is to consume resources so that U.S. taxpayer dollars can be transformed into military hardware and also big fat golden parachutes for people that work at the military industrial complex. The problem with the Ukraine is, it's one thing to play those kinds of games in the Middle East with a bunch of, 9th century tribal goat herders. It's a whole different ball of wax to play those games with Russia, who is, as weak as their economy is, they still have a military, a modern military, who actually does mean business, actually is unified, and does have very, they have nukes. They have assets that are near peer to us, which is not something that we've not fought a near peer in the modern era. The internet did not exist the last time we fought a near peer. So this is a very dangerous game that our politicians seem to be playing, and they're playing it for reasons of, well, mass formation psychosis, perhaps, and then also because of financial interests. I hear Dyer getting very huffy. What do you want to say?
So Russia, obviously Putin, by the way, is a tyrant.
He's a bad dude.
One of many tyrants in the world, I would mention. He is a tyrant who has assassinated citizens in other countries because of what they've said about him. He is a very bad dude. However, he's not the only murdering tyrant in the world, and for some reason we're focused on him. Now, Ukraine. I get and you could apply this to many countries, why it would be in the U.S. best interest if a nation was friendly to us and we denied our enemies access to their resources. That's a general rule. Us having more influence and denying our enemy resources is a good thing. However, the U.S., because of certain individuals within our country, have poured an insane amount of resources into that country and not gained either of those things. We've not denied Russia the resources, and we also haven't gained influence. All we've done is drop money in there for it to be laundered to go to...
That's what I'm saying. The goal isn't... in many of our conflicts the last several decades, the goal was never to win. The goal was to consume resources. As with foreign aid is just a less bloody way of consuming U.S. tax dollars and converting them into funding for the Clinton Foundation or funding for this green NGO or et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we've been doing in the Ukraine. Ukraine has been a kind of a hybrid model of, can we waste military resources and foreign aid? It's been this great experiment that's working very well for everybody right now.
Yeah, people will. I was saying that was people will say the reason why we have to do the operations in Ukraine is because of trying to achieve that goal. And I accept if that was really the goal we were trying to achieve, and we actually had achieved it, that would be something valuable. But that possibility of gaining influence and denying our enemy resources is not worth nuclear war with Russia. It is also not possible because of the fact that our government leaders have made it so our military is weak, and we're speaking from a position of weakness in this area against this adversary. So it's a fact that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Knowing that, is this the point that the danger to America is so high that we need to go to nuclear war with Russia and possibly even China because they now have their interest aligned? I think no, that this is not the line for us. And if this should be a moment where we think, okay, we've lost credibility on the international stage. People do not fear us. And honestly, our military needs to be better. The fact that they are willing to do this and that they're going to do this should be a wake-up call about our preparedness.
Well, and let's be blunt about what the purpose of NATO was. NATO was formed during the Cold War period after after World War II as a way of preventing the then Soviet Union from continuing its conquest of Europe and picking up where Hitler left off. Europe, the entire point of NATO, the entire point of our partnerships with Europe is to keep their sovereignty as a region from these larger, more belligerent powers that wish to take their resources or whatever, or their baguettes usually. If Europe has, especially Germany, one of the primary culprits over there, has had this giant energy deal with Russia. The rest of the European nations don't seem to be concerned about getting Ukraine into the NATO alliance. They don't seem to be concerned about Russia having an iron grip over Europe's energy or invading Ukraine. And I really don't see what the U.S. interest is other than defending Europe's sovereignty. If Europe has decided that their sovereignty is tradable for oil from Russia, then that's their decision to make. We cannot be expending resources because Europe, with their sovereignty, is making bad decisions. Sometimes you have to let them do that. If the only alternative would be that the U.S. has some kind of invasion into Europe, which the Ukraine is loosely a part of, without the permission of the Europeans. So what is a nuclear war, or even just a let's take nukes off the table. Let's just say any kind of combat in the Ukraine going to look like? We're going to have to station our troops in various European bases, various countries who we are quote unquote defending that don't even want us to defend them, that aren't contributing any resources or military personnel of their own to their own defense. If they don't want to be defended, then that's their problem. NATO should have been a stopgap, not a 50-year to century-long project, which is what it's going to end up being. It should have been a stopgap while Europe rebuilt its military complex, rebuilt its industrial capacity, and then was able to field a generation of soldiers that could then defend Europe's territorial integrity. Now, they instead used, over the last 50 years, they used the generosity of you, the American people, to create a socialist hell inside of a bubble of safety paid for by the American taxpayer. That is not your fault. That's not my fault. That is nobody in America's fault that they chose to waste their time and waste their defense. They did almost the exact same thing that Afghanistan did. It's just that Europe's much bigger than Afghanistan, where Afghanistan could have easily, over the last 20 years, decided to get their shit together while they had U.S. protection. But instead, they decided to create gender studies degrees and fuck kids. That's what Afghanistan did. That's what they did with their generous gift from the American taxpayer of defending them. Europe, they, with their generous gift of defense from you, the American taxpayer, they decided to undermine it at every turn and not have any interest in defending themselves. So what is the U.S. interest in Ukraine? The U.S. interest in Ukraine cannot be any more than the interest of Europe in the Ukraine. And Europe appears to be extremely disinterested in it.
We have insane members of both Republicans and Democrats who are saying that if you say that we shouldn't invade Ukraine ourselves preemptively and possibly go to war with Russia over the Ukraine, then we are carrying water for Putin, that we are shills for Putin. They're saying that we are just propagandists for Russia if we are opposed to going to war with Russia over this country that is of very little consequence to us and not worth the loss.
Yeah, if the response to your question about, well, what is the U.S. interest in this region of the world? How does that benefit the U.S.? If the response is, I'm going to accuse you of being a foreign adversary, a foreign spy that's infiltrated...
Because I don't want my brothers and sisters to die for Ukraine?
Yeah, if that's the response, is that you might be a Russian operative, the other person is lying to you. That's how you know.
That is insane. All right, the next part.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'll leave that one for later. Alrighty. Our next one is Biden apparently. I guess correct me if I'm wrong here. Biden apparently incited an erection, claiming that the next erection will be illegitimate. Am I reading that correctly?
It's a insurrection. A typo. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Was that a Chuck Schumer quote, perhaps?
Yeah. Biden incited an insurrection, claiming that the next elections would be illegitimate.
That's a mouthful. All right, let's see what he had to say here.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking of voting rights legislation, if this isn't passed, do you still believe the upcoming election will be fairly conducted and its results will be legitimate?
Well, it all depends on whether or not we're able to make the case to the American people that some of this is being set up to try to alter the outcome of the election. And it's one thing, look, maybe I'm just being too much of an optimist. Remember how we thought not that many people were going to show up to vote in the middle of a pandemic? We had the highest voter turnout in the history of the United States of America. Well, I think if, in fact, no matter how hard they make it for minorities to vote, I think you're going to see them willing to stand in line and defy the attempt to keep them from being able to vote. I think you're going to see the people we try to keep from being able to show up, showing up and making the sacrifice that needs to be made in order to change the law back to what it should be. But it's going to be difficult. I make no bones about that. It's going to be difficult. But we're not there yet. We've not run out of options yet, and we'll see how this moves.
And on
I wonder what makes it more difficult to stand in line. Do you think it's going to go get a driver's license, or perhaps in many of these cities where minorities appear to be congregating, the crime rate is through the roof. The murder rate is 4 digits. The drive-by shootings are on a daily basis. Do we think perhaps maybe if there, to the extent that there is any kind of voter apprehension for minorities, do we think that maybe it might be more related to the risk of standing in one location in a high crime city for an hour? Or do we think maybe it's got something to do with, I don't have a driver's license, even though they
I would say that the high crime and murder rates, which, by the way, one Democrat recently says, there's been less murder attempts. There's been more murders, but less murder attempts. So we're actually making progress.
So is murder becoming murder is becoming more efficient?
Exactly. Like that's not a positive. How do you say that like it's a positive? I also want to point out that he mentioned that one thing they're concerned about is people not being willing to vote because of the fears of COVID. Well, who spread those fears of COVID? Who did the lockdowns and made people afraid to possibly go and vote because of COVID? That'd be predominantly the Democrats who are fear mongering over it.
And I don't know what he is actually just completely making this up too. There is no evidence that, in fact, there's the opposite evidence that minorities did not come out to vote last election, or that they're not going to come out to vote in the next election. The number of, now we were told this was record voter turnout. Never before in American history we had 89 million votes. We had, that was just what Biden got, wasn't it? It was 160 million votes, wasn't it?
Somewhere on there.
I think it was 160 million votes.
Highest ever, though.
Yeah, and we've only got 350 million Americans. So you're looking at something about 40% ish. Right off the top of my head there. Normally, U.S. voter turnout had traditionally 30%. Been in the 25s or lower. So we have had this massive boost in U.S. voter participation, which is, I guess it is what it is. But the idea that the opposite narrative is true, that we've had record low voter participation at the same time that we've got record high voter participation, is just, there's no evidence of that. What there is evidence of is that minorities are turning out in record numbers for Republicans, that the polls are showing that minorities across many different demographics are now becoming more conservative. So that is where this minority issue is going to come up at, is that the record number of minorities voting, well, it looks like less of them are going to be voting Democrats. So the Democrat net minority voter is going down, and they can't figure out why.
I want to narrow in also on the first thing he said was for whether or not it would be legitimate or not was based on whether or not they could make the case to the American people that the laws were being done with the intent to change the outcome of the election. So it wasn't his. I think that the word choice is important there. His goal is to make the case, to convince people that these laws are meant to change the outcome of the election, not actually prove how they do. And if he tried to actually show the real world effects of the laws, he'd have to look at them and say, the laws in my own state are actually more restrictive. The laws in California and New York are actually more restrictive than the laws that they are trying to demonize as being Jim Crow 2.0 coming from Texas and Florida. These laws actually don't restrict voting in any way, and that they're just lying about it. So he has to make the case. He has to argue to convince people, not actually prove a point and fix any real problems.
Well, I mean, perception is reality, apparently, and since the Biden administration appears to be failing on multiple fronts now, the only way to convince you that they're not is to gaslight. So
his goal is to lie to you, basically. That's how he's going to get
he's
people.
a dog-faced pony soldier. Look at him.
Yeah, and then we also had he's saying he wants to say that these laws need to be changed back. The funny thing is that a lot of the changes that are made are actually putting the laws back to the way they were for the previous election because they were changed for COVID. So that is one of the changes that are being made. So if it was illegitimate last election or would be illegitimate this election, then the previous election would also be illegitimate, right? Because they're trying to change it back to the way it was.
That would be the logical connection, Dyer. Let's watch.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to clarify. A moment ago, you were asked whether or not you believed that we would have free and fair elections in 2022 if some of these state legislatures reformed their voting protocols. You said that it depends. Do you think that they would in any way be illegitimate?
Oh, yeah, I think it easily can be illegitimate. Imagine if, in fact, Trump has succeeded in convincing Pence to not count the votes. Imagine if...
In regards to 2022, sir, the midterm
2022, I mean, imagine if those attempts to say that the count was not legit. You have to recount it, and we're not going to count. We're going to discard the following votes. I mean, sure, I'm not saying it's going to be legit. It's the increase in the prospect of being illegitimate is in direct proportion to us not being able to get these reforms passed. But
so
I don't
Biden
think
did not.
You're not going to see me, and I don't think you're going to see the Democratic Party give up on coming back at assuming that the attempt fails today.
So the Democrats failed to pass their voter reform. And he's saying here that if the legitimacy of the election is directly related to whether or not they're able to pass those reforms. So he's saying that the upcoming election will be illegitimate. Now, I seem to remember them saying that Trump was inciting an insurrection by implying that the election was illegitimate. Correct. So is that not what Biden's doing here?
Yes.
Even CNN called him out on this.
And just to get into what he's specifically talking about, trying to reform which votes you're allowed to challenge and kick out, that is an important process. The election is typically not stolen by losing ballots. The election is typically stolen by finding ballots. That's not to say that any particular election in recent memory has been stolen or not stolen. I'm just making a comment on how it's easiest to steal an election. And typically voter fraud is not somebody who didn't vote. Voter fraud is somebody who did vote. And the way that you rectify that is by eliminating their vote, by somebody challenging it, a investigation taking place, and that ballot being removed. And what do we see in the Democrat quote-unquote voter rights bill? We see the granting the ability, and now I don't know if this was in the specific federal one, but I know that various Democrat states have tried to launder this through. New York famously just did, where they are giving the quote-unquote right to vote to non-citizens, and they've decriminalized the process of a non-citizen voting in an election to which they are not allowed to vote in. So that is where we are seeing what the Biden administration is saying, election integrity is removing the ability to challenge and delete votes that were fraudulent and decriminalizing those who would issue fraudulent votes. How is that integrity?
They also want to make it so that states cannot remove people from their voter rolls when they move out of the state or when they die. And other legitimate reasons why they should be removed from the voter rolls. So you need to keep these people on here who shouldn't be able to vote in your state, but you want to make it so they still possibly could. They also want to make it so that a appointed official by the current party has to approve any changes to a state's voting process, which completely takes away the state's ability to self-govern.
Yeah, so for instance, if Montana decided, okay, a fraudulent vote has these, and these characteristics, and if poll workers find that a vote has these characteristics, they are by law allowed to reject that vote and not include it in the count. Before, and now thankfully currently, because this measure failed, a state was allowed to do that themselves. They were allowed to create their own laws governing their own elections, and that was allowed. What the this voter, quote unquote, voter rights bill would have done is made it so that states can no longer pass those kinds of laws without getting an approval stamp from the executive branch, which is a massive overreach of what the supposed power of the executive branch is supposed to have in the Constitution. That just completely ignores the entire idea of powers and separations, etc., that the executive branch of the federal government would have veto power over the legislative branch of a state government. That is beyond insane.
I also want to point out that I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, there was a previous law on the books that made it so that some states, including Texas, I think it was like a few of the Confederate states, they, for a long time, under federal law, had to have any change that they wanted to make to their voting system. They had to have it approved by the federal government. And that was thrown out by the Supreme Court as being unconstitutional. So some odd 3 years ago. So including this, that states need to have them approved by the federal government, should be immediately found unconstitutional because it's already been found unconstitutional before. I also want to point out that it would not be applied evenly because when Jen Psaki was asked about this, in her response, which I don't think she meant to say this, she said that some states who have a history of passing voter regulations that are racist, those states should have a check from the federal government. So she wasn't saying everyone. She's saying some states that she thinks are racist. So it'd probably just be red states.
You know, part of me wonders if maybe we shouldn't just lean into this and let them pass it, and then when Republicans are able to take back the reins of power, use that to bludgeon all of these blue states that have these insane election laws. Like, what if this did pass, and then Republicans get control back in 2 years somehow? Now, I know a lot of these voter regulations would
this would prevent them from getting control.
Yeah, I know. But it's just let me run through this imagination. Is, you know, in 2 years or 3 years now, Republicans take back power. This bill was passed, and then what? The Republicans are able to just veto all of these insane New York voter regulations they have that are allowing illegals.
Veto or modify.
Yeah, veto or modify. I mean, maybe there's a mistake in not leaning into this. Maybe somebody should have snuck an amendment in there that says this takes effect 3 years after passage, and then let it go, and then it would have gotten passed but not been in effect until the next presidential cycle, and then at that point the Republicans could have used it. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if maybe the strategy when you're in a tug of war with your opponent is sometimes to do a fake out and let go of the rope for a second, let them fall backwards, and then yank them forwards again. Maybe sometimes we have to be a little more creative on this. If right now, unfortunately, the small government libertarian that I am, just having one place in the government where it's libertarian and the rest of it's just this gigantic totalitarian leviathan, maybe just acknowledging the reality of the situation is that to the extent that there is authoritarian powers that have been created for the federal government, maybe it would be beneficial for the Republicans to grab onto those sometimes to destroy the other parts of the system.
It would be funny if we don't allow it to pass now, but then Republicans get control, and then they take the exact same bill and put it up for a vote and watch the Democrats whine and moan about how terrible it is.
Yeah,
it'd be hilarious. Obviously, the purpose for this bill is because the Democrats know that they're going to lose big in the upcoming election, and that their only hope for maintaining power is through corruption of the voting process, to make it so that your vote doesn't really matter, because they're going to engineer it so that they get the votes they need to stay in power indefinitely.
So Joe just basically said, the clip that we watched a minute ago, that he was concerned that the elections didn't have integrity, and that they wouldn't have integrity unless that bill passed. Well, that bill failed to pass, so it went on to Jen Psaki, White House press secretary.
She has a hell of a job, by the way.
She has a absolute hell of a job.
After the press conference, she basically had to reverse everything Biden said.
Yeah, because after the press conference, the bill failed, and so she had to explain to the American people why Joe Biden didn't mean to say what he said. Let's watch.
Jen, during his marathon press conference, the president also suggested that the next election could be illegitimate if we don't pass voter protections. You've clarified that he was talking about Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 results. But as we speak, there are many, many state measures that would curtail the ability to vote and make it harder to vote by mail. There's 160 big lie loyalists who are running for statewide positions that would give them authority over our elections. So without reforms, why should voters have faith in the legitimacy of the next election?
Well, voters should be eyes wide open and clear-eyed, and this is what the president was getting at the other night, that people are trying to make it harder for them to vote. Now, there's all the things you said, all the nefarious things you said, but also there are things like, you know, if you're a mom and you have 3 kids and you're trying to vote and participate in the election, why not have more places where you can drop off your ballot? Why not have more days where you can go exercise your right to vote? You know, there are things like that that a lot of states are making it more difficult. So what the president was trying to convey is we need to be
That can easily be solved by making Election Day a national holiday, which has been suggested multiple times. And for some reason, in the 5,000-page bill the Democrats put up, didn't include that. I think that maybe there's some issues with having additional federal holidays, but I think that would be a perfectly fine solution. If the Democrats' argument is that working people don't have time to go to the polls, and they don't have time to stand in line after they get off work at 5 or 6 p.m. Because everybody else got off work at the exact same time they did. Well, then make it a holiday. I mean, that is a solution. It is a minimal movement solution. The Democrats will, they'll pass 1,000 pages of legislation when one page will do. They never find the minimal route. This is a problem with a very easy solution to the extent that the problem even exists, and they decide that instead of doing the simple solution, we should create another bureaucracy to overlord the states.
And I don't get it. Like, take Texas, for instance, which is one of the ones that they're demonizing. Okay, let's say you couldn't go in on election day. You could have gotten a mail-in ballot for months. You could have registered for one. You could still vote. It might have required a small amount of very obtainable effort to do it.
Well, and
there are workarounds.
The number of polling locations, like why does the federal government get to decide that? They don't know what the conditions of local resources and population densities are. I mean, I've not heard that there's a problem with voter precincts. I mean that's decided at the local level. I didn't.
Right, but they're criticizing it as without knowing the situation. Like, one situation they're talking about was a very rural county that had 4 locations, but a very small population, and the different locations were not getting enough usage, so they just narrowed it down to 1.
Well, the other thing that she's doing is that she's pointing out things that are good ideas, but she's implying that they don't exist, right? So, right. Dyer, it'd be healthy if you ate more salads. Like, that is a true statement, right. But in it, I'm implying that there's a problem with what you're eating. That you have a problematic diet, right. And that might not be true. Dyer does not eat salads, though. He only eats raw beef. Just straight from the cow.
I eat a beef salad. It's all beef.
Yes. But in Jen Psaki proposing, it would be nice for high density areas to have more voter precincts. That's absolutely true. But does she have examples of high density voter precincts that are too dense? I know that they talk about that a lot. Do they have any evidence of that? Is there any data? Can you show me on a map
in these Republican states, or do you have those same problems in Democrat states?
Now, I fully believe, again, because voter precincts are decided on at the local level by local politicians and local activists, I fully believe that blue cities, high-density blue cities, have extremely mismanaged election processes. I fully believe that. But I don't see how regulating red rural states is going to solve that. It's not.
Agreed.
Let's continue.
Making it more difficult. So what the president was trying to convey is we need to be clear-eyed, open-eyed, educated about what our rights are. We have doubled, the Department of Justice has doubled our funding and support for voter protections across the country. The Democratic National Committee will be doing a lot of work out there. But he wasn't trying to predict that the elections will be illegitimate. But he was trying to make clear to people that 2020 and what former President Trump tried to do after that election is not 60 years ago. That was less than 2 years ago. And we need to keep talking about it and make sure people understand what is going to be attempted out there in community.
That's not what he said, and he specifically was referring to 2022. So her trying to reimagine what he said is ridiculous, because he was very clear about saying that it would be illegitimate in the upcoming election, not the past.
Well, I mean, basically, Dyer, what he meant to say was the exact opposite of what he said.
Of course.
Don't you understand that?
She has a difficult job. Why?
Isn't it great that that's the commander-in-chief? I mean, sometimes he's giving you an order to do something. Sometimes he's giving you an order to do the exact opposite of what he just said.
Well, you see, his opinions he expressed in his speech at the press conference are not the opinions of the White House, as they are different.
That is true. For those of you who don't know what Dyer's talking about, there is a ongoing, it's not a joke, it's an ongoing thing that Jen Psaki will regularly say, that Joe Biden's opinions are separate from the opinions of the, quote, White House, as if the White House is some kind of conscious entity with its own opinions that are separate and distinct from the president of the United States,
or possibly a group of people who are actually in power and when he's not.
Yes, they're called the White House. Some people think that they were called the Illuminati, but that was just a ploy by the White House. All right, let's see here. So after this, after Jen Psaki tries to clarify Biden's statement, Kamala doubled down using the reverse card by then saying that that Joe Biden meant that if they didn't pass the voter rights bill, that the election will not have integrity. So Joe said, hey, if we don't pass this bill, there's going to be no election integrity. Psaki said, no, he didn't really mean that. He does think that the elections are free and fair. They just could be better. And then Kamala says, nope, the elections will have no integrity if we don't pass this bill. Now, unfortunately, we don't have that video because the link that is in the notes does not link to a Kamala video. But do you want to watch a random video?
Oh my god.
Actually, I think this is just a copy of one of the videos we already watched, so we'll just take our word for it. All right, so let's see here. So Biden also during his press conference, he also defended calling those who oppose a federal takeover of the elections racist. So if you have a political disagreement with allowing the federal government to overreach its power into local elections, you're a racist. Because that's how being a racist works.
Yep.
Return. You campaigned and you ran on a return to civility, and I know that you dispute the characterization that you called folks who would oppose those voting bills as being Bull Connor or George Wallace, but you said that they would be sort of in the same camp.
No, I didn't say that. Look what I said. Go back and read what I said and tell me if you think I called anyone who voted on the side of the position taken by Bull Connor that they were Bull Connor.
And
That is an interesting reading of English. I assume you got into journalism because you like to write.
So did you expect that would work with Senators Manchin or Sinema?
No, here's the thing. There's certain things that are so consequential. You have to speak from your heart as well as your head. I was speaking out forcefully on what I think to be at stake. That's what it is. And by the way, no one forgets who was on the side of King or Bull Connor.
We went over that last week.
Yeah. The history books will note it. And when I was making the case, don't think this is a freebie.
So basically what he was saying is, and I apologize that we weren't displaying the video there, but you guys could hear what he was saying. Basically what he was saying, though, is that I'm a demagogue. Like, that was basically saying, like, well, sometimes I say things that are just for pulling on your heartstrings, but aren't really what I mean. Because I'm a demagogue, and that's what demagogues do, is they just say things that are, good for the moment, I guess, to get an emotional reaction, but aren't reflective of their real views or reality. They're just trying to emotionally manipulate you.
I love how he keeps saying, we all know who was on the sides of those racist segregationists. Yeah, it was you guys. Actually, it was you personally as well, because you're against the integration of schools.
Yeah, you didn't watch our show last week. We went over Joe Biden's speech where he literally just said what he just said that he didn't say. That was a sentence. And we went over who was on the sides of Bull Connor and the other people that he mentioned, and it was all Democrats. Always Democrats.
So he's saying that, I didn't call anyone actually Bull Connor. No one's accusing you of saying that someone is someone else. No, you were being accused, because you actually said this, of saying that people who oppose this voting rights, in quotations, bill are on the side of racist, segregationist slavers. And that is what we're saying. We're not saying that they are literally that person, because that's a stupid interpretation of the argument. It is a straw man. But you know what, Biden? Challenge accepted. You said, read exactly what I said and tell me if that's what I said. Okay, I will do that for you right now. Here is exactly what Biden said. He said, and the question is, where will the institution of the United States Senate stand? Every senator, Democrat, Republican, Independent, will have to declare where they stand, not just for the moment, but for the ages. Will you stand against voter suppression? Yes or no? That's the question. They'll answer. Will you stand against election suppression? Yes or no? Will you stand for democracy? Yes or no? Obviously, I think that this bill does not actually support democracy. It doesn't actually prevent election subversion. It is subverting it, and it's not stopping voter suppression. It's oppressing it. But he's saying that those are the things that they're having to say they are for or against. If you are against this bill, you are opposing democracy. You're supporting voter suppression. You are subverting elections. And that's the context of what he's saying. And here's one thing he goes on to say, and here's one thing every senator and every American should remember. History has never been kind to those who have sided with voter suppression over voter rights. And it will be even less kind to those who side with election subversion. So I ask every elected official in America, how do you want to be remembered? At constitutional moments in history, they present a choice. Do you want to be on the side of Dr. King or George Wallace? He said there, you are going to be on the side of one of those two individuals, Dr. King or George Wallace. Do you want to be on the side of John Lewis or Bull Connor? Do you want to be on the side of Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis? He's asking Americans and elected officials, do they want to be on the side of a racist, a slaver, or a segregationist, or do you want to be on the side of those who were opposed to those things? I think it's a very clear implication that you're saying if you, the bill he's referring to, do not support that bill, that you are suppressing votes, you are for the suppression of votes, you're against democracy, and you are cut from the same cloth as George Wallace, Bull Connor and Jefferson Davis. It's extremely clear in context of what he said. There is no confusion. And at no point is anyone saying that Joe Biden is literally saying people's names are being changed to Bull Connor.
But Dyer, have you considered that Joe Biden doesn't remember that speech and he doesn't remember saying those things?
Well, he didn't write it, and I don't think he remembers what he did like an hour ago. So no, he probably doesn't remember what he said, and he's probably thinking about it now. He's like, oh man, that'd be really absurd if I really said that. That'd be absurd. I couldn't have said that.
Oh, jeez. All right. So, along with all of these eloquent clips we've pulled, this one is perhaps the most eloquent, the eloquentest part of Joe Biden's 2-hour-long presentation. Let's watch.
Well, that could school reopenings or closures become a potent midterm issue for Republicans to win back the suburbs?
Oh, I think it could be, but I hope in God that they're look. Maybe I'm kidding myself.
Yeah, you're not really.
As time goes on, the voter who is just trying to figure out, as I said, how to take care of their family, put 3 squares on the table, stay safe, be able to pay their mortgage or their rent, etc., is becoming much more informed on the motives of some of the political players and some of the political parties. And I think that they are not going to be as susceptible to believing some of the outlandish things that have been said and continue to be said. You know, every president, not necessarily in the first 12 months, but every president in the first couple of years, every president, of the last presidents, at least 4 of them, have had polling numbers that are 44% favorable. So it's this idea that, but you don't. Not you all, but now it is, well, Biden's at, one poll showed him at 33%. The average is 44, 45%. One poll him at 49%. I mean, the idea that...
what does he say?
The American public are trying to sift their way through what's real and what's fake. And I don't think I've never seen a time when the political coverage, the choice of what political coverage.
Oh my God, that's uncomfortable.
I didn't realize that you could form whole paragraphs using sentences that had no subjects. I thought that the subject was a critical component of a sentence. And it would appear that, though it is difficult to understand, perhaps impossible, it does appear that you can, in fact, form whole paragraphs out of sentences that have no subject. It's pretty.
I made
pretty
the
amazing.
mistake of trying, when I watched his first 2 times, of trying to make sense of what he's saying, but I had to realize in the end that he doesn't even know what he's saying, so trying to make sense of it is a stupid thing to try to do. He's clearly had no response, and he was just fumbling through it. Now, this was the best example of the worst of him that day, but he had plenty of examples. If you just watch the 2 hours, the painful 2 hours.
Yeah, Dyer sacrificed himself for you guys. He actually did watch through the whole thing, right?
Yes, I did.
Oh,
it was
my
painful.
God. Was Jesus. Why?
That's why it was so long. There wasn't that many questions. He just took forever to answer every question.
I would there is a statistical process and information theory that you can run over large volumes of text, and you can determine mathematically whether or not this this text has information in it or if it's gibberish, and they use this on dead languages or encrypted documents to determine, is there actually something in there or is this just static? And I would love to run that stats process on one of Biden's speeches, because I think that statistically I could prove he's conveying no information.
I wonder what letter grade he'd get on it.
Not high.
Not high. So overall, looking at his entire speech, the plan forward presented by Biden wasn't a strategy or a plan. What he stated, particularly in the end of his speech, what he planned to do moving forward on basically every issue was to get out and communicate his agenda himself, in person, to the people. He's obviously been hiding in his basement and not doing press conferences, and he's saying that's the problem. It wasn't that his agenda sucked. It wasn't that what he was trying to get done was poorly planned, poorly executed. It wasn't the substance of his agenda. It was his communication of his agenda that was the problem. In the press conference, he was confronted and in some cases took credit for the many things that went wrong during this last year. Among them are he failed to get the Build Back Better plan. He failed to get the voter overhaul. He failed to pack the courts. He failed to get the filibuster overturned. He failed in the Afghan withdrawal. He failed on COVID. And in COVID, there was more deaths under Biden than there was under Trump. There was no plan for testing. He did not re-up the purchase of the testing kits to make sure that people had enough kits to travel during the Christmas season, and they ran out. He didn't mandate the mandate for COVID vaccination was overturned by the Supreme Court. He did not make any effort to continue Operation Warp Speed to produce new vaccines for the different variants, to the point where now the vaccine we have, they're requiring like double 4 total shots on, is a vaccine that is no longer actually efficient and works against the current variants. So if he actually had continued what Trump was doing, what he had already shown worked, they could have been producing different vaccines for the variants and actually had a working vaccine rather than one that is only partially effective. So from the perspective of even Democrats, he has failed in every part of COVID. He hasn't shut down the virus and has not done more than Trump. He's done less. Trump ordered PPE. Trump ordered test kits. Trump did Operation Warp Speed. Biden did none of those things. Biden also failed because of Democrat policies causing a skyrocketing crime rates. He failed because of inflation going through the roof directly as a result of his policies and lack of action. Because of his lack of action and his policies, there's been huge supply chain disruption. Also partly due to the vaccine mandates he was trying to force on people. Under Biden, there's been 2 million border crossings that we know of. Those are the ones that are caught by police. And then there's also the continued inhuman, by their standard, treatment of migrants. If they said Trump was bad, Biden, having far more people shoved into far less space, is even more inhumane. So by all metrics, Democrat and Republican alike, Biden has failed on many things and succeeded in achieving very little in this first year.
Well, yeah, Dyer, but I mean, if you're just going to focus on the things he did wrong, I mean, I bet you can't come up with another thing that he did wrong.
That was a long list. What else do you want?
When you only look at the things he did wrong and highlight all of the things that he did right being none, I mean, come on, man. That's just it's a little bit biased. You can at least make something up. That's what the media does. But with all of that is wrong that Biden has done, he also failed to provide any way forward. A plan to communicate his plan better is not a solution to the current problems.
Right.
And even Yeah, I mean, this one, I don't know if it's in the notes, so I guess I'll read it, but I don't know if I believe it. Even fake news CNN agrees that a better communication plan is not actually a plan to fix the problem.
Scott, I read a piece that you just wrote, essentially saying this is Joe Biden doing what Joe Biden does.
Yeah, well, I never imagined how quickly this would all unfold. The person they sold on the campaign, the nice old, moderate grandpa who just wanted to help everybody get along and compromise, is not what we got over the last year. He has no mandate really to do much of anything. It's amazing that he got a couple of things done when the mandate was really pretty clear. 50-50 Senate, a near 50-50 House, and a pretty close presidential election. The mandate was simply replace Donald Trump and don't do anything drastic or stupid. And everything about this agenda is extremely drastic. And he's been angrier
And
than I think
stupid.
people expected. He's been more divisive. He's been more partisan. You look at the issues. We built 5 years of coverage on Trump out of Russia, COVID, and democracy. The president at his press conference invites Russia to invade the Ukraine. We got more deaths under Biden than Trump. And now we have the president and vice president and leading Democrats question the legitimacy of the 2022 election. Are we any better off on these three issues that we crucified Trump over? I think he has a lot of political problems, and an AP poll came out this morning. Only 28% of Americans want the sitting president to run for re-election, and fewer than half of Democrats. This is a disaster.
Brutal. Brutal. That was brutal.
He gets the defibrillator, man. He just killed him.
Man. All right. Well, the last bit of our coverage of this 2-hour-long press conference with Joe Biden is something that he didn't address. So as Dyer went through, he addressed a lot of his failings. He addressed his few victories, which are usually failings for the country. But the things that were really important to America, his campaign promises, he failed to address two of his biggest campaign promises ever. He just didn't even talk about them. Biden, after more than a year in office now, has still not delivered to the American people on his campaign promise to deliver true Anana Shabbat pressure. And he's also failed to provide universal Badacath care. What about all of those families who have uncared for Badacaths? What about all of the, I don't know what the constituency is for true Anana Shabbat pressure, but what about all the people who care about that were hoping?
Everybody cares about that.
For true Anana, well, they care about what, Dyer?
True Anana Shabbat pressure, I guess.
The true Anana Shabbat pressure constituency cares a lot about true Anana Shabbat pressure. And they also have they have a little bit of overlap with caring about their Badacaths. I mean, Dyer, would you want your Badacath uncared for?
Of course not. And I also hear that Badacath care is very heteroflexible.
Yes. Now, I for one, being more conservative, more libertarian spectrum side of this thing, is I think that people should be taking care of their own Badacaths, but that doesn't change the fact that Joe Biden promised universal Badacath care, and he has failed to deliver it.
Right.
All right.
So, on those 2 points alone, he is a massive failure by all metrics.
Absolutely.
All the poor Badacaths.
Uncared for. And the true Anana Shabbat pressure crowd, my heart goes out to you. I know you guys were really, really hopeful that finally this was your year. After
we were holding out for you.
Being a completely ignored constituent forever.
Yeah.
Finally.
You finally had a president who said he was going to be on your side and fight for your rights. And then it's just so terrible that he finally gets in office and he does nothing to help you.
Now, at the risk of killing the joke by explaining it, because it's sometimes necessary, Joe Biden on the campaign trail during a rally said that he was going to provide true Anana Shabbat pressure, and he was going to fight for universal Badacath care. He said those words, if that's what you want. He said those sounds.
You motherfuckers still voted for him.
He said those sounds. And the reason why I'm explaining that is because there's a funny, a little bit of a joke thief here, a little bit of a joke pirate that I am. There was a person on Twitter who tweeted out a similar thing to this bit we just did about how Joe Biden has failed to provide the American people true and unashamed pressure. And a bunch of leftists said that she was crazy. She must have spilled coffee on her keyboard. What's wrong with her? She's truly losing it now. What is she talking about? And what's funny is, the reason why I'm explaining it now is that the left doesn't realize Joe Biden promised to provide true and unashamed pressure. He actually said those sounds. They don't know that he said those sounds. And so when you repeat it back, because Joe Biden is completely incoherent, they think that you're an idiot. But really, they're an idiot because they weren't paying attention and they voted for this guy.
Yeah.
So ask, if you have a Democrat friend, somebody who pulled the lever for Joe Biden, you ask them where they stand on true and unashamed pressure. Is that maybe why Joe Biden's poll rate among Democrats has slipped to below 40%? Is it possible that all of those people were really hoping for true and unashamed pressure, and when it wasn't delivered, they stopped supporting Biden? I think that the slipping poll numbers are easier to explain than what a lot of people think, and I think it has a lot to do with the failure to provide true and unashamed pressure.
And when your Democrat friends are shown the video that they didn't know exist and finally realize that Biden did say those things, then ask them, how many other things do you think the media has not shown you about him?
Yeah.
All right, next story.
All righty. Yes, our next story. All righty. So, we have a bit of an odd story. There was
British governor.
Yes, there was a British terrorist last week. So last Saturday evening, during our show, coincidentally, we have had several high-profile terrorist attacks occur during our show, which I suppose is a good thing because
it means we're
not suspects, right? But I know that over the last 2 years, we've had, I think, 4 higher profile terror attacks take place during the show, or high profile events of that nature. But anyways, last week, during our show, coincidentally, a man that the media described him as a British man, took 4 Texan Jews hostage in the Congregational Beth Israel Synagogue in Dallas. It's Dallas, Texas, not Dallas, Britain. The media and the Dallas PD were quick to proclaim that they did not know the motives of this filthy redcoat Brit, but they were confident that this incident had nothing to do with Islam.
That's a little strange, isn't it? They don't know the motive, and they know the motive had nothing to do with Islam.
Yes, it's very, very strange. I'm scratching my chin.
It doesn't seem like you can know both those things at the same time, unless you're lying. And why would anyone assume a British man was taking hostages because of Islam?
Well, probably they thought that because the, quote, British man, his name was Malik Faisal Akram, a very traditional English name, and he was demanding the release of an Al-Qaeda terrorist.
Which is a very British thing to do.
Yes, and he'd taken Jewish hostages on a Jewish holiday.
Which is the Brits do all the time. The Brits always do that.
Keep calm and take Jews hostage. And he told his brother in a phone call during the incident that Allah was going to make him a martyr for this.
Which, to be fair, the British people do all the time. They all want to be martyrs, and they all praise Allah. This is
Exactly.
So far we have a very British guy with the British name of Akram. He's doing the normal British activity of trying to take hostages and negotiate the release of a Muslim terrorist, as Brits do. He does this by taking Jewish hostages on a Jewish holiday in a Jewish synagogue.
Yes,
which is repetitive.
Yes,
and then he, as a Brit, says he is going to do this in the name of Allah and be a martyr, as Brits do. That all makes sense to me.
Yes.
All right. So basically, people thought it might have something to do with Islam because it clearly had something to do with Islam.
Yes, that is Correct.
Oh,
that's weird.
I feel
Oh,
silly
man.
for making some wild assumptions
Oh,
here.
wow. Yeah, man.
During the event, the 44-year-old British national demanded the release of an Al-Qaeda terrorist who was convicted in 2010 of attempting to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan. So, nicknamed Lady Al-Qaeda, Afa Siddiqui was a prolific Pakistani terrorist until her capture in 2008, where she also attempted to kill several American soldiers. She is often celebrated and referenced in Islamic groups.
Do you know the story of how she attempted to kill American soldiers?
Is she the one that went up to a
No, it's a little disappointing. She didn't go up to anywhere. She was captured, and then because she was a woman, the American soldiers let down their guard and put down one of their weapons because they were resting after they had captured her, and she very quickly jumped and kind of juked them and grabbed the gun and then started firing at them. It was completely after the capture operation.
You never put your gun down.
Yes, I don't care if it's a girl or not. Yeah, so it was after the capture operation was complete. Everybody had survived. It was a mission success by all counts. And then they were just sitting, waiting to transport her somewhere after they had captured her. And one of the soldiers had he unclipped his rifle to put it down, and then she grabbed it. Why, I don't know. I'm sure he regrets that one.
Jeez Louise.
But either way, she was before her capture and attempted murder of U.S. soldiers, she was a prolific planner of terror attacks for about a decade before that. Akram, who is the British guy, he live streamed his holding Jews hostage. He live streamed the event, which ended with a SWAT team stunning him with a flashbang grenade and then shooting him dead before he was able to harm any of the 4 hostages. To anyone not in the FBI, it was immediately clear as Akram was live streaming the event, and because he targeted Jews on the Sabbath in a synagogue, and that he was demanding the release of an Islamic terrorist, that he was motivated by Islamic extremism, also known as Islam, and that he was anti-Semitic. To the FBI's credit, it would appear that this was one of the very few terror attacks that was not being actively planned, paid for, and perpetrated by the FBI. So it was understandable how the FBI might have been caught off guard by this genuine terror attack, and they had a hard time identifying the motive. Because normally the motive of a terror attack is because the FBI was doing it. So it's a little bit difficult to figure it out when it's a real scenario.
There was a real awkward moment when the FBI officials were calling around to all the different bureaus saying, "Hey, was this you guys? 'Cause I wasn't tracking this operation, but apparently one of us actually had an operation going on here. But who's in charge of it?" It took them like half a day to figure out that none of them actually were FBI agents involved. So Blackburn, UK, home of 50,000 Pakistani Muslims, released a statement shortly after the terrorist name was released, saying that he was suffering from mental health issues called Islam, and that his family was confident he wouldn't harm the hostages.
I don't know how that could be.
Really?
I don't know how that could be because I cannot remember the outlet that got it, but it was, I want to say it was like the Israeli Times or like the Israeli Sun or something like that. It was an Israeli newspaper, but they got I don't know how they did it, but they got an audio recording of the terrorist talking to his brother during the situation, and it's like a 10-minute long phone call, and he's explaining to him, "I'm doing this because I've had enough of the Jews and the white people and all this stuff, and I want Islam to like take over the world, and I'm hoping that in doing this I can encourage other Islam or Muslims to come to America and to do the same thing, and I'm doing this in the name of Allah. He told me to do it, etc., etc." And so it seems pretty obvious that in his own words he was doing it because of Islam.
It's really convenient that the
and that
Muslim...
perhaps he was willing to harm hostages.
Yeah, it seems really convenient that the Pakistani Muslim group there was confident that he wasn't going to kill any hostages after he'd already been shot dead and hadn't killed any hostages.
It's almost like when you ask the FBI, hey, did you guys try to kidnap the Michigan governor? And they're like, no. Nope, wasn't
Why would
us.
you say that?
Wasn't us. Nope. Did you guys plan an insurrection on January 6th? No, we can't answer that.
We wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Come on.
Why would you think that?
That's weird. You're silly.
So, initially, the FBI stated that the hostage taker was British and that he was not motivated by anti-Semitism. FBI Special Agent Matt DeSarno, I wanted to say Damon, said, we do believe from our engaging with the subject that he was singularly focused on one issue and he was not specifically related to the Jewish community, but we're continuing to work to find a motive. Well, I believe the motive, he was quoting the hadiths rather frequently. Now, I'm not personally familiar with text in the hadith, but from what I was informed by people who do, he was quoting the hadiths during the hostage situation. The hadiths are kind of, they're addendums to the Quran.
No, they're rulings by a Muslim cleric, basically like their court. So
isn't that a fatwa? I don't know. The hadiths, whatever they are, the hadith texts are typically considered to be more violent in nature than the Quran, even though the Quran does have a lot of prescriptive violence in it. The hadiths are typically considered to be more extreme than the Quran. So the fact that whatever the hadiths or origin is, the fact that he was quoting the hadiths does seem to imply that he was willing to do harm to people.
They are records of words, actions, and silent approval of Islamic prophet Muhammad. So, as I understand, there were rulings made by him on different issues, and his words on those issues. So they are.
Which I believe Muhammad, he did or he didn't like the Jews.
He did like the Jews.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
So they're also the most extreme of the teachings. Not that there's any unextreme teaching, but the more graphic ones are in the hadiths, not the Quran. But those are also the words of their prophet, and they are used as their legal basis for how they structure their government and their society.
Fascinating.
Anyways, the FBI also initially said there was no indication that anyone else was involved in the siege. However, on Saturday night, UK counterterrorism police arrested 2 teenagers who were in some way connected to the terror attack, as they were relatives, I believe, of the attacker. Akram had arrived in the U.S. only 2 weeks before the attack. During that time, he lived in a homeless shelter and purchased a firearm illegally off the street. Akram was under investigation for terror ties in the UK prior to being permitted to travel to the U.S. Why was a terror suspect allowed to travel to the U.S.? Great question.
Yeah, don't we have like a whole fucking bureaucracy called the Department of Homeland Security and a bunch of surveillance agencies that look at my dick pics and read my text messages? Like, don't we have like a whole thing to prevent that from happening?
No, you're forgetting that the whole reason for the organization is to look at your dick.
It's not a side effect. It's the purpose.
No. Look at your dick pics is the goal, and it's a fun a coincidence when they sometimes catch a terrorist. So the reason why MI5 stopped investigating or downgraded the investigation into Akram was because they lacked historical data on his past behavior, probably because he was an immigrant who came there with no records showing his criminal history. And they also claimed that there was far too many low-level investigations to devote resources to low-level possible threats like his, meaning that they have far too many threats that they think are more important than this one for them to actually spend time working on this possible threat. But I find it funny though that they have so little resources to spend on, I don't know, investigating violent Islamic terrorists, but they do have plenty of time and money to spend on putting people in jail for saying something offensive online.
The FBI, as follow-up, is currently looking for the driver who apparently dropped Akram off. It is unknown at this time if that driver will turn out to be an FBI agent. All right, next story. All right.
Okay, 5G is turning the frickin' planes gay.
There's only a way to start it off.
Sorry.
Take her away, Dyer.
So, telecom companies have rolled out 5G networks to various locations across the United States over the last few years. But on Wednesday, Verizon and AT&T turned on their C-band 5G networks, which led to a massive chaotic panic. Here's why. The C-band frequency used for the 5G cell service turned male flight attendants gay. Yes, it's the 5G that does that. That's the only reason.
And proving that Dyer will read anything that I type for him. The real reason why there was panic about the 5G services being turned on is that the 5G frequency, called the C-band, overlaps the frequency range used by commercial aircraft radar altimeters. So that's what lets the plane know how high off the ground it is. Usually you want to be high off the ground, not on the ground. Typically means you crashed. So major airlines feared that interference from the cell towers operating on the 5G spectrum, which utilize the C-band, could disrupt the aircraft's ability to safely navigate in low visibility conditions. This would be caused by the altimeter sending out a radar pulse to see how far away it is from the ground, and then normally it would just receive that pulse back and it would figure out how far away the ground is. But now it receives continuous static from the 5G towers that are near the landing strips. So it doesn't know how high off the ground it is because it's just receiving, your dick pics or your text messages or your phone calls. That's great. It's a really great design. I'm glad we don't have any kind of government agency that's supposed to coordinate these things.
90% of the purpose of this altimeter for why this is a problem is because they use it for landing. so having these towers near the airports would make it very difficult for some aircraft with certain altimeters to land at those airports at nighttime or in bad weather. The chief executives of major U.S. passenger and cargo carriers on Monday warned of an impending catastrophic aviation crisis, which would take place on last Wednesday when 5G was enabled, which they suggested would render a significant number of wide-bodied aircraft unusable or unsafe to use, could potentially strand tens of thousands of Americans overseas and cause chaos for U.S. flights. This was also the warning from the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA.
So the conspiracy theory was that 5G caused COVID, and COVID caused the airlines to have to shut down or reduce capacity. The reality is that the 5G just skipped the middleman and immediately grounded thousands of aircrafts. It's the same effect. It's just the conspiracy theorists have an extra step in there, which is not necessarily needed. Government regulators have been in weeks, and this should have been years, decades long stalemate over what to do about the overlap problem. Aviation and transportation industry representatives have threatened to cancel flights, saying that 5G on the C-band frequency poses a safety threat, which it does, while the wireless carrier industry representatives and private jets, I might add, claim that it's perfectly safe for them to use the 5G because their jets don't use those altimeters, presumably.
Exactly. AT&T and Verizon are now yet again delaying their plans to switch their new 5G antennas to full power near certain airports. Some airlines also canceled and redirected some flights. Regulators are still hashing out solutions and a lot of what they're going to do remains unclear because they have not made a lot of progress.
So the kind of the specific thing that happened, the sequence of events, was late Wednesday night, or I think it was Tuesday night, because they're planning on turning on the additional towers. They've had several 5G towers on for years in some of the bigger cities. You might have noticed that if you ever traveled to a bigger city before COVID hit. But this thing that was happening on Wednesday was turning on the network nationwide. And so obviously near airports, cell phones are important because a lot of people are, looking up their flight stuff or calling their family or whatever when they land and all that stuff. And so there was towers there. And the deal that was struck was that they were going to originally just the cell carrier said, we're turning them on. The government said we could, screw you guys. And so you had a lot of international airlines, not American Airlines, saying, we're not flying to America anymore. We're canceling all these flights. And there was like thousands and thousands of flights canceled over the course of like a few hours. One airline executive said on Tuesday morning, he didn't know that the bands overlapped and that this would break the altimeter until Tuesday morning before Wednesday when they were going to turn it on. So, I mean, nobody was really paying attention to this, and they really should have been. I mean, this story isn't necessarily about who did right and who did wrong. It seems that like everybody in all industries and the government did everything wrong at every step along the way. I just thought it was an interesting story to bring up here. But basically, late Tuesday, early Wednesday morning, when they were going to turn on the towers, the U.S. cell carriers decided or agreed that the towers around airports would be turned on at low power. So normally they'd be broadcasting on a frequency very loudly, for lack of a better way of explaining it. There's kind of a loudness factor with your radio waves, and so they were going to turn it onto a quiet setting so that it wouldn't be so disruptive to the planes. And then a lot of these a lot of these companies that canceled flights to the U.S. then resumed their flight service, and so it was kind of a minimal disruption, but there was a lot of people panicking that morning. And now we still don't know when or if the cell carriers will ever be able to turn their towers up to full power, or if even at a low power state, it's still going to be disruptive to the airplane. One thing is clear, though. One thing that is clear: aircraft manufacturer Boeing warned the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg in December, in a letter that they wrote to him, that the 5G rollout would cause interference that could, quote, adversely affect the ability of an aircraft to safely operate. Translation: it could cause the plane to crash. Pete Buttigieg, in response, replied with an out-of-office message that he was still on a Pete-ternity leave.
Also in December, the FAA issued an urgent order forbidding pilots from using potentially affected altimeters around airports where low visibility conditions would otherwise require them to. That new rule could keep planes from getting in some airports in certain circumstances because pilots would be unable to land using instruments alone. And it affects more than 6,800 U.S. airplanes and dozens of aircraft manufacturers.
Mayor Pete was notified over a month ago of this issue, and in that time, they could have swapped out the affected aircraft or rescheduled the start date for 5G, or assisted with studying whether or not this 5G was going to affect the aircraft. They could have done any number of those things over the last year. And to be fair, they could have done this during the Trump administration too. This is a deal. The 5G spectrum has been planned to be utilized for about 10 years, and it's been studied for 10 years before that. So this is not something that just happened all of a sudden. This is something that's had a lifetime. Some people have had an entire lifetime under the looming 5G go live date, and no one seemed to care about it until the day of. Let's see here. So in that time, they could have swapped out the affected aircraft. They could have limited the areas where this was happening at. All these aircraft transfers could have been made without a last-minute canceling of flights, stranding people. They could have taken their time to modify the aircraft and figured out a solution to the overlap problem. They could have worked with wireless carriers and airline industries to have a plan in advance so everyone knew what was going on and what to do. In fact, this crisis and everyone that panicked was due to a lack of action by Mayor Pete. and there was people who dropped the ball before that, but Mayor Pete is the one who's on the field right now. So it was his job to pick up that ball and run with it. And well, he was on paternity leave.
There's a lot of people who could have done something before Pete, but Pete was expressly warned by 2 different organizations that he had a month to take action or there would be a crisis, and he didn't do anything. In fact, I don't know what Pete has done since getting in office. Do you know of anything he's done other than call us racist? Calling
he
roads
claims
racist?
to have had a baby.
Wow, I mean, that's progressive. I guess men can have babies. It's the first man to give birth. Cool.
Yes.
So the breastfeeding must have been very awkward. The president of Emirates, Sir Tim Clark, told CNN on Wednesday that the airline was not aware of some of the potential 5G rollout issues until Tuesday morning, calling the situation one of the most delinquent, utterly irresponsible he had seen in his aviation career.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So we have the FCC that is responsible for managing the airwaves. The electromagnetic spectrum is one of the most perfect examples of a tragic commons that needs to be regulated. It's everywhere. It's literally inside of you right now. The space required.
Oh my God, get it out.
I know, right? And there's an infinite amount of airwave to be had. It's just that you can't use the same frequency for 2 different things. There cannot be overlapped. But there is more than enough for everybody. And the way that this has been managed by the government is actually one of the very few examples of a new technology creating a new purpose for the government. Now, there's a lot of times where new technology has created a claimed new purpose for the government that has not been true. But I believe that the regulation of the airwaves was genuinely a time when there was a new technology that did not exist at the time of the founding fathers that did mandate the federal government with a new task, a new thing that they should be regulating. Now, did they regulate that in the most perfect way that they could have done it? Probably not. But at the end of the day, they are supposed to be regulating that so that things like this don't happen. The EM spectrum is required for many, many important things like flying planes. And it's also very important for things like your cell phone and all the communication technologies that we've got. It's important that those things don't interfere with each other. In fact, if you look at basically any radio device that you've got, if you look on the back of it, it'll tell you what its FCC compliance number is, and it will say that this device is not allowed to create harmful interference to other devices. Well, did the FCC really, did they accomplish that goal with the 5G? It would appear not. The frequency spectrums are managed, tracked, and leased because nobody can own the air, right? The people own the air. And so the government on your behalf leases the airwaves. They lease certain spectrum, certain frequencies to certain groups to use them for a defined period of time. And the government is supposed to be keeping track of who's using those and which ones are where and which ones are overlapping, etc. It was their job, one of the few jobs that they've got. It was their job to make sure that the frequencies airplanes use were not overlapping with the frequencies 5G wanted to use, and they utterly failed in that mission. And it is just another entry on the laundry list of things where, well, not even a very long list of things, where there's a short list of things in the Constitution that the government is supposed to be doing, and it would appear, one of those being border integrity, and it would appear that the federal government has absolutely no interest in doing the things for which it has a mandate, like ensuring the integrity of the border, regulating the airwaves, etc. They have no interest in doing that whatsoever. But they have this massive interest in doing all kinds of things that they've got no business doing. About, interfering with elections, or giving, allowing migrants to come over unvetted, or not managing the airwaves, or telling you to have a mask mandate, and telling you that you got to pay another 30 cents of taxes on your gasoline, or canceling pipelines, etc. There's all kinds of things that the federal government's interested in doing that it has no mandate to do. And all of the things that it has a mandate to do, it has no interest in accomplishing. It's almost like the federal government has no legitimate purpose any longer. Almost.
It's almost like that. I don't know if you guys know, but prior to the 5G being turned on in Fox's area, he actually was straight.
I was. It's true.
Yeah. So that's the future that they've made for us by using 5G.
That's probably why Pete Buttigieg didn't want it to turn off. He didn't want to, wake up and, damn, now I'm married to a guy and I got a kid with him somehow. How'd that happen?
Damn it. I kind of get it now.
Yeah, somebody in YouTube chat's like, make up your mind. I was like, well, no, I think I explained myself. There's a few things that the government does have I'm not an anarchist, so that there is purpose for the government. It's just that it would appear that the several purposes the government has, it doesn't do, and the infinite purposes the government doesn't have, it does do, and that's a problem.
It could boil down to the government's job is to protect you and your rights, and all the very few things that are enumerated that it's allowed to do are within that scope, but are even more narrowed down. And it doesn't do that. It actually seems like it's doing everything it can to take away our rights and to expose us to danger. Meanwhile, trying to engineer more ways to control our lives.
Yes. All right. Well, that's the show for tonight.
That's the show. Yeah,
that is. All right. Well,
been fun, guys. Thank you very much. We'll see you guys next week
for a very even more special show than this one.
Yes, and even more special, as we alluded to before. This is a very special show.
Yeah, there'll be definitely be a surprise. If you want to find out what that surprise is, you guys will have to tune in. So those of you who are claiming there is no prize, there is no surprise, you're a conspiracy theorist, maybe a racist, and definitely a lying dog-faced pony soldier. I will not stand for it.
I'm not saying this show is not special, but the rate to which this show is special is determined by whether or not we pass our bill and you show up and listen.
Correct. Well, right. I appreciate all you guys for listening. I appreciate for those of you guys who donated. Much appreciated. And hopefully you guys all have a great and safe weekend. Hopefully you, so I guess you, if you have a new phone, you can, try out that 5G, crash a plane or something.
All right. We'll see you guys next week. Direwolf out.
All right. Chavis signing off. See you guys.